Oh. Yeah, so now that I'm known as the photographer on the advisory council, I'm glad that I put a photograph because my whole career went away and now I'm just the photographer. But this is the Aurora from a class I taught 2 weeks ago in my neighborhood. So, neener, neener, neener. Anyway, so I was at somewhere, sometime, and somebody referred to something as the magic of watching grass grow. And as you know, my theme has always been watching paint dry, watching grass grow. Welcome to the IETF. Super awesome. John said I could still make up whatever title I wanted, so I did. Oh, awesome. So this is the standard disclaimer, which I believe will be changing soon. Because of some changes. Anyway, but for right now, I'm not officially anything. I just go there as a tourist and I laugh at people and live stream on Facebook what I think. And I'm going to tell you some of the things I think. So I think there's always something that just makes me laugh hysterically at the IETF, and this is one of my all-time favorites. So the IETF has this elaborate process for standardizing things, and they usually follow it. But it turns out with HOMENET, they used a top-level domain, a special-purpose top-level domain called .home. In all the documents, it made it all the way to RFC 7788. And guess what? They didn't follow the process to make .home an actual special-purpose domain name. So they have a standard that references a special-purpose domain name that isn't actually standardized. Awesome. So there's a process I'll talk about later in my slides. They're trying to decide, well, should we say not to implement .home? Should we change it to something else? What should we do? Because it's not actually officially a special purpose top-level domain. Something else of note, there's a lot of work to modernize the transport. So there's Quick and Plus, and they're both like the beginnings of maybe optimizing the transport over UDP instead of TCP. So those are some things to follow. I heard the same talk 3 times. I have a bunch of slides on that. That was super exciting. And the IPv6 RFCs are not official internet standards. So we've been deploying it for a really long time now, and it's not actually an official IETF standard, which I think is interesting. And we'll talk some more about that. And Ross Callan is definitely and literally a gray beard of the IETF, and he's retiring. And he gave a really awesome talk that I'll talk about in a little bit about the cost of having too many standards all for the same thing. And there's these really cool little computers called hacker boards that I'll talk about in a little while. I think I have to get one because they're like puppies. Super cute. A lot of people tell me that they loved my talk, especially the footwear part. So here it is again. I don't know, people seem to like it. ARIN Hughes is to blame for this because of the guy who had neon green Crocs. Anyway, onward. So IEPG, I talk about it every time because the bulk of what's interesting that happens at the IETF happens Sunday from 10 to 2. It's an operators group that's been meeting at the IETF for 25 years, maybe, I don't know, a long time. And nobody at the IETF seems to know that we exist, but we meet and the talks are really interesting. So there were some talks about little changes to the IANA registry to help the IETF, just little bits and pieces. There was an IPv6 deployment survey that's of interest that if you're interested, you should look up. There were 900 responses, and 300 of them said that it's a commercial service on their network, which is promising. Different sorts of prefix sizes and that sort of thing. And then there was a talk about IPv6 performance. And Jeff Houston also gave a talk at NANOG about IPv6 performance. And it seems like maybe things have changed since the IEPG talk because he said it was, what did he say, total crap? I don't know, something like that. So if you want to take a look, stats.labs.apdink.net, which is, of course, Jeff had this presentation and the NANOG presentation. Let's see. Randy Bush talked about invalid ROAs, which is an interesting talk if you're following that sort of thing. Yeti DNS, there was also a talk about this at NANOG. It's really cool. They built a whole parallel route to the DNS so that they could test things, because you have this big distributed system, and maybe you want to try some new feature, but if you're just trying it in a little test lab, maybe that won't really mimic the real world. So they've actually built a whole parallel route system where they're testing various things they want to test to the root, which is really pretty cool. Why is it not? There we go. And these are some more things that are going on. I have 30 minutes and 62 slides, so I tend to skim some of these things because it's a lot of slides. But these are some other things that were talked about. The RIPE Atlas trace route. There's data that you can go and use for your own research, and it's available to everybody, so that's pretty neat. They have those RIPE Atlas probes all over. There's even one in Wyoming where the Aurora was, and you can see what's going on the network. So this is the presentation I saw 3 times. And I have a couple of slides about it because she's trying to solve the age-old problem of multi-homing with provider aggregatable address space. And I'm not sure that it's really a problem that's easily solvable. But in v6, there's this source address dependent routing option that's supposed to be implemented. And so she's trying to grapple with how you could use that to perhaps solve the age-old problem of multi-homing with provider aggregatable address space. This is more notes from the second time I heard the talk, and this is some details about it. It's basically multiple scoped forwarding tables using that technology in v6. So if you're interested in that, and there's many different ways that have been tried to solve this. Shim 6 was probably the last most memorable one. So we'll see what happens. It could happen. Okay, so 6-man, this is what I try to put at the beginning of each of these. What is this working group anyway? So the charters are a lot longer, but I take a little digestible part of it and stick it in so that you can kind of see what they might be talking about in this group. Let's see. Yeah, so this is the work that I was talking about in the highlights. Well, maybe we should make v6 actual internet standards. So they're going through the draft standards and taking all the bits that we learned from all this time deploying v6, that's not an internet standard, and then they're going to take that, update the documents, gen them again, and then make them official internet standards. Let's see. So there's a special purpose address, v6 special purpose address registry work going on. There's global is used in a lot of different contexts, and they're trying to define global, and then the special purpose registry, so there's some drafts going on with that. Let's see. This is that presentation I saw 3 times. I have a lot of slides about it. It was like, really? I'm going to watch it again. I don't know. Anyway, so v6 operations is slightly different than v6 man. This is less protocol work and more operations sorts of things with deploying v4 and v6 in parallel. Let's see. This is some work being done that actually affects us, or maybe long-term affects this community. They're talking about a prefix per host as opposed to an address per host, and why that might benefit your network, provide more isolation between devices on the network. And that would, of course, use more address space than we're already using in v6, because if you're using a prefix per host instead of an address per host, it's a lot more address space. So that was something to keep an eye on, that I'll be keeping an eye on. This is a v4, v6 translation prefix that's being proposed, and this is actually pretty controversial because it's not unique, and a lot of the people in the meeting were like, yeah, I'm going to just use my address space. I have a ton of it. And then other people are like, well, maybe I'll use this. So we'll see what happens with this, but it's being proposed. So when you're doing translation between v4 and v6, you would use this, or maybe you'd use your own address space. I think it's ISP by ISP who would do what, but it's being standardized. So the routing area open meeting, I try to go to a meeting every session, and when there's nothing to do with V6, I pop into these other more generalized to try to get a little view of what's going on. And Ross Callan, for those of you who don't know him, he's been going to the IETF. I think he's gone to more IETFs than anyone. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but he's a super neat guy, and he's retiring, and he gave this really, really thought-provoking presentation about what happens when you have too many standards for the same thing. And those of you who've seen my talk before, you've seen me go on and on about all the, especially the encapsulation protocols, this wrapped in that, wrapped in this, divided by that, sent by this. I mean, there's just a ton of them. And they all really do the same thing. So what happens when you have 8 protocols defined that do the same thing? That means that maybe you don't really have a standard protocol because this guy implemented version A, this guy implemented version B, and they don't talk to each other, but they're both standard protocols. So he gave a really thoughtful presentation about that, you know, just saying, hey, people, you know, maybe we don't need IP and IP and IP and UDP and IP and GRE and IP and IP, and, you know, like, if I was making this up, it wouldn't be nearly as funny. I mean, these are actually exist. You know, like there's that many protocols for encapsulation. So anyway, it's really thought-provoking, and I think the IETF really needs to do some soul searching about that very topic. Anyway. Code match is really cool. They're matching, they're starting to get more and more people coding to IETF standards and tracking whether there are implementations, because the whole premise of IETF is rough consensus and running code. And over the years, we've had less and less and less running code, and more and more internet standards. So this is really, really good work. And if you're involved in any sort of educational institution, there's a hackathon before the IETF. There's all these groups putting students together with standards that need to be implemented. So be good to pay attention to if you have students that need things to work on. I think I can probably get that. These are some other things that are going on, and just so the routing area open meeting is basically all the routing GORP that isn't assigned to a working group yet. So these are some of the high-level routing things that are going on in the IETF. So I started going to the Human Rights Consideration Working Group because I thought, what in the world, internet protocols and human rights? Like, I get like data on the internet and human rights, but internet protocols and human rights? So it's really interesting stuff. I've been really surprised. So this woman, I'm in the process of getting her book. I haven't had a lot of time since the IETF to do that, but these folks are really looking at what we do in the IETF. How does that affect, you know, people around the world and their rights? And are we doing anything that would prohibit them from having freedom of expression, freedom of association? And it's interesting work. I really enjoyed going. And this guy is from the UN. He also gave a really good presentation. And the IETF wrote an RFC, there was a presentation on lessons learned from the Privacy Consideration and Internet Protocols RFC, which was also a really good presentation. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, it's definitely worth checking out, because in the beginning, I just didn't even really think, I didn't think that, I thought they were apples and oranges, but actually there's a lot that protocol specs can do to make sure that people's rights aren't infringed upon. So 6LO is basically V6 over all those little things that go to sleep and wake up, and maybe they're asleep for a long time and they have a little battery and they have not a lot of space for code, you know, like your thermostat or your refrigerator or some MSTP like machinery in a factory or whatever. And so this is all those kind of devices, and how do we run such a big protocol over them and make sure that they still can survive. So there's a bunch of different things going on with like Bluetooth networks and MSTP, like I said, machinery and like factories and stuff. Let's see. Anyway, there's a border, 6-low border router work being done, because there's this whole thing where you duplicate address, you detect a duplicate address and you turn yourself to death. So they're trying to solve some of those problems for these little devices. There's also been a couple of plug fests where they take all these little devices and they hook them together and see if they work. And it's pretty interesting work. Let's see. I thought that I guess it's a different one where I had the guy with the little mini PCs. I guess that was HOMENET. So DHC is everything automatic addressing, like DHCP, every kind of dynamic address assignment goes into this group. And there's a lot of work to secure DHCP right now, because a lot of this stuff got implemented and it wasn't particularly secure. It's like we're trying to secure the DNS, we're trying to secure everything kind of in hindsight, because in the beginning it was just, an experiment that got out of the barn or whatever. So there's a lot of work being done to just secure the dynamic host assignments. Let's see, these are some other drafts that I'm not gonna tell you about, but they're in there. And then OPSEC is operational security. And this is sort of a little bit of the charter of what they do. Let's see. This guy, he came up with this model, this STRIDE model: spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege. And then he took all the IPv6 transition technologies and sort of rated them against this scale. And you could argue that maybe not all of the security GORP is in there, but it's an interesting exercise of taking all the stuff that we're starting to use and looking at it against, a security model to see, what we need to fix and what we don't need to fix and that sort of thing. So it's a pretty interesting exercise. And there was a lot of arguments about, you forgot this one or you forgot that one, but you kind of have to start somewhere. And there's been a lot of work about filtering extension headers in IPv6. I think I talk about it pretty much every IEPG, because there's a fellow who always talks about it. And this is a little bit of work being done to talk to providers about maybe what you should filter with extension headers and what you shouldn't filter, so that people who are trying to use extension headers for something they need, maybe they could still have their packets go through. So someday maybe that'll get settled. It's ongoing. This is just me being goofy, but readdressing apparently is hard still, even though it's not supposed to be from the document. I just pasted that in there. It's me being goofy, but apparently it's still hard, even though we have a new protocol and it wasn't supposed to be hard. It's still hard. SDN, so they finally have a charter, because I don't know, for those of you who've seen my talk before, they were, what did they say? Unconstrained by charter was the SDN motto until now. So I took some bits from the new charter. So basically SDN is separating the network infrastructure from the management plane, so that maybe you use some big all-knowing management system to push out everything to the network devices instead of configuring them all individually. There's a lot of other SDN-like things, but it's basically separating the management plane from the can't think of the right word for it, but from the network infrastructure. China Mobile is doing quite a bit with SDN, and this was a talk by China Mobile about what they're doing to manage their network with SDN. Let's see. Yeah, and this is some more GORP people using different kinds of SDN. So it's starting to happen, I guess. Let's see. This is a way of using SDN to synchronize all your clocks on your network and coordinate various things that are going on your network. There's some more SDN-like stuff. Like I said, I have a lot of slides. So in the internet area, let's see, well, this is what it is. This is another one of those overarching groups that I go to when there's no V6, and I could probably go have a coffee, but I always go to a session because I'm kind of like that. So the IAB Stack Evolution Program, those two things, Plus and Quick, that I talked about in my highlight slide, those all fit under the Stack Evolution Program, and I think all of us need to be following that because it could really affect a lot of what we do on the network over time. Could speed things up, which would be really great. So this GUE, it was super timely that poor guy, so it's another encapsulation protocol, and of course, Ross Callan had already spoke at the plenary and at routing area about having too many protocol standards for the same thing. So of course, somebody got up and said, did you see Ross's talk? You got another encapsulation protocol, what's up with that? And the guy said, well, this will be the last one. And of course, we all laughed hysterically, and he sat down. But apparently, we're going to have yet one more encapsulation protocol. So this is basically GRE, and how we've had GRE for what? Since like 1990, I don't know, 1989, I don't know, a long time. And this is basically GRE with like maybe a couple little bits flipped. I know, it's so different, and apparently it'll be the last one. I'm so excited. Some other topics that are going on in the internet area, and maybe eventually I'll move to individual working groups, are these. And one of them, I think, me as a network operator, would have been really nice to have this extended ping where if you don't number your interfaces, you can still ping them. That would be kind of cool to have. So we'll see what happens with that. Okay, HOMENET, my favorite, all-time favorite. A bunch of geeks designing a network for people who aren't geeks is really entertaining because we're geeks and it has to be arbitrarily complex and ridiculously huge, and yeah, it provides a lot of fun for me. I just love it. So HNCP is like the basic protocol that gives you your brain when you connect to a home network, and they're starting to talk about what happens when they try to use it. The architecture is on its way to being done. I think I actually sent comments on that draft to the author, which was fun. Users should not be skilled or knowledgeable, and I think everybody at the IETF should remember that when they're designing a HOMENET, but they forget because they're geeks. Let's see. Oh, and then RFC 7788, what do we do about .home? That went on for a long time because .home is just sort of out there and not standardized. So we'll see what happens. People are writing code to use .home in the HOMENET. So I imagine that we'll continue to use .home in the HOMENET, but there's some debate. And should we write a draft to say don't use it while we figure out what they should use? I don't know. It still makes me giggle. Let's see. These are some more drafts that are going on in HOMENET. BABEL for HOMENET, or BABEL, whatever you want to call the routing protocol that they invented for HOMENET, which I'll rant about in a few minutes. Some other drafts for HOMENET. There's a lot of work being done with naming in the HOMENET, and how do you name all the devices in a HOMENET securely, and then the people in the HOMENET shouldn't need to know how to do DNS, but how does everything figure itself out? So we'll see how that goes. So BABEL, however you want to call it, it's a routing protocol, yet another routing protocol that is apparently for HOMENET, because we couldn't decide between RIP, OSPF, or ISIS, so we picked a new one. Awesome. So yeah, the guy, it would be funny if it's funnier because it's true, but basically it's a protocol for determining changes to the protocol. So onward, the hacker boards were really super cool, guys. These little teeny computers, and this guy, I mean, like, he handed them out. It was so much fun. He made a HOMENET of all these teeny weeny little computers. They're like, you can fit them in your hand. And there's a whole article that I put a link in to here to all the different little, it's like a full PC on a little USB dongle thing. It's amazing. Everything's getting smaller, except us, I guess. So CIDR, which is the Secure Inter-Domain Routing Working Group, I got to go there this time. Sometimes it overlaps with V6 stuff, so I don't get to go. There's quite a bit of work going on in CIDR with our PKI and BGP-SEC and a lot of stuff. We have some people here in the room who could speak more to CIDR than I can, but I like to at least put some of the drafts down so that if you're interested, you can go and check them out. So there's some global statistics information going on of what's happening out there in the wild. And okay, so I've heard little bits about this over the years, and I keep thinking, oh, I really need to look that up. But so in ARIN, when you get PI space, you get it from ARIN. So if you get provider independent space, you go to ARIN, you get a block of space. So in other regions, apparently, you get PI space from your upstream, and that is something that I have been pondering now for quite some time that I didn't actually realize. Maybe I'm the only one who didn't realize that. So I guess the RIRs give blocks to ISPs so that they can assign PI space. I didn't know that. Maybe you didn't know that. Rudiger's got his hand up. Anyway, so that was something that, how long have I been doing this? And I just learned that. So anyway.
To my knowledge, that's unique to RIPE.
Is it unique to RIPE? Okay. But still seems different, right? Let's see. Oh, we all learned a new word at the IETF, mergence. And it actually fits us perfectly. I put the definition because it's actually a really useful word that we don't use in our industry. But this woman, you know, English wasn't her first language, and she found an awesome word that perfectly described what she was talking about. It was pretty cool. And a couple of people in the room actually looked it up because they didn't know what it meant. And then one of them, the most outspoken, not me, got up and said, wow, that's an awesome word. Thanks for using that. So who knew? So it's basically, if you take a routing, a ROA, and you put too much information in it, if one little bit of it is invalid, the whole thing is invalid. So there's a lot of effort going into making, you know, one ROA, one block, so that you're not invalidating a huge amount of information if one thing is invalid when you're trying to validate your routing advertisements. And so emergence would be like the smushing of them all together, and I guess pulling them apart would be some other fancy word, I don't know. So anyway, so there's some work being done there. Her talk was super interesting, and there's a link to the slides. Some more work on RPKI that's happening, consolidating RAs, that sort of thing. I've been trying really hard to break out the acronyms, and if I'm still not doing a good enough job, let me know. I'll try really hard. Then I'll have like 75 slides, but I'm happy to do it. So let's see. The meeting venue working group, we're really doing some soul searching in the IETF on a lot of levels. Where we have meetings, how do they affect the attendees? Are the human rights, you know, laws in that region, do they affect our attendees? That sort of thing, which is a really interesting. They've also been doing a lot of work on diversity of leadership roles in the IETF. I think I've talked about that a few times. And it's a little bit easier in that community because there isn't an election, so it's not as election oriented. So the leadership has really taken a role of seeking out qualified, diverse candidates and then choosing from them. And the view on the stage in the last 6 years at an IETF meeting of when the leadership is up there has changed significantly, it's really cool. And I think that this is a really good exercise in, like, where are we going and why are we going there, and how does that affect our attendees, I think is a really good thing. So there's some more slides about this. I don't know, it's not really technical, but it's still pretty interesting. So here are some links to all things IETF, different things about BOFs, the daily dose, pretty much anything you'd want to look at with respect to the IETF is here. If you're going to go to your first IETF, these are the things you should check out. There's actually a really good video explaining that not everyone is friendly and you need to try to have a thick skin, basically is what it says. But it's still pretty interesting. And if you are going to your first IETF, look me up because I'm happy to show you around, introduce you to people. This is my very favorite cartoon ever. Just love it. It makes me so happy every time I see it. Anyway, I was going to put names of people, but I didn't. So does anybody have any questions or comments? If you go to the IETF and you want to embellish on something I said, this is certainly the high-level view. High-level view.
Any questions for Kathy?
Andrew Dahl, not really a question, but a comment. In the NANOG meeting earlier this week, there was a really good presentation about the work being done on extended communities that we have talked about as necessary for 32-bit ASN. So just a pointer to that for those who may not have been in the room earlier this week.
And that's extended BGP communities, right?
Yeah, extended.
Yeah. Okay. Large?
Large. Yes. Large communities.
Large communities. Awesome. Rudiger?
Large communities is a new attribute type and not loaded with any structure, which was one of the bad things about the extended communities.
Cool.
Any other questions for Kathy? Thank you, Kathy. Excellent presentation.